When I first moved to Pine Hollow, I thought I was finally escaping the nightmares that had haunted me for years. A quiet town on the edge of an ancient forest, tucked away in the northernmost part of Maine, it seemed like the perfect place to forget. To leave behind the wreckage of my old life, my wife's tragic death, my guilt, and the endless cycle of sleepless nights. The house was cheap, too cheap, in fact. A two-story Victorian on the outskirts of town, nestled right up against the towering pines. It was a little rundown, sure, but nothing that a few repairs couldn't fix. At first, the isolation was comforting. No neighbors for miles, no sounds of traffic or city life. Just the wind through the trees, the occasional call of birds, and the soft rustling of leaves. I should have known better. The first night I slept there, the silence felt wrong, too quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I woke up sometime after midnight to a sound I couldn't place. It was soft, like a low murmur, barely audible through the walls. I brushed it off, told myself it was just the wind, or maybe an animal outside. But it was strange. It almost sounded like whispering. I convinced myself it was my mind playing tricks on me, the remnants of grief clawing at my sanity. The days were uneventful. I spent most of them fixing up the house, repairing creaky floorboards, patching leaks in the roof, and clearing out the overgrown backyard. The forest loomed just beyond the edge of the property, dense and dark, even in daylight. I'd catch myself staring at it sometimes, feeling watched. But whenever I looked closer, there was nothing. Just trees, shadows shifting in the breeze. A week in, the dream started. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, but I could never remember what I'd been dreaming about. Just vague images, dark shapes moving through the woods, something standing just outside my window, watching me sleep. Always watching. The worst part was, when I'd wake up, I'd still hear the whispers. Louder now. Like someone was in the room with me, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. The next morning, I noticed something odd. The pines. They were closer. I was sure of it. When I first moved in, there had been a good 20 feet between the tree line and the back of the house. But now, the nearest pine seemed just a few feet from my kitchen window. It was impossible. Trees don't move. Not like that. I decided to walk into town, maybe talk to someone about the house, see if they had any stories about the place. I stopped at a small diner on the main street, striking up a conversation with the waitress. Her name was Marla, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes. When I mentioned where I was living, her face changed. The friendly smile disappeared, replaced by something harder. Fear, maybe.
You bought the old Westcott place?
She asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. I nodded, suddenly uneasy. Yeah. Why? She glanced around the diner, then leaned in close.
People don't stay long in that house, mister. Not after what happened.
What do you mean? What happened? Marla hesitated, then sighed.
The last folks that lived there, they disappeared. Just gone. No sign of them. And before them the same thing. Every few years someone new moves in. And every time they vanish. No one knows where they go or why. But we've all heard the stories. They say it's the pines. Something in those woods takes people.
I laughed nervously, but her expression didn't change. She was dead serious. That night, the whispering was louder than ever, like a chorus of voices just outside the walls. I couldn't make out the words, but there was a rhythm to it, a chant. I was sure of it now. Something was out there, in the trees, watching me. I went to the window, pulling the curtain back, and my heart froze in my chest. The trees had moved again. The pines were practically pressed against the house now, their branches tapping against the glass as if they were alive, reaching for me. I stumbled back, the room spinning around me. Then, something moved in the shadows. At first, I thought it was just the wind stirring the branches, but then I saw it clearly. A figure, tall and dark, standing among the trees, barely visible. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, staring up at me. I slammed the curtains shut, my heart racing. I was losing it. I had to be. I couldn't stay in that house another minute. Grabbing my jacket, I ran outside, into the cold night air. The forest loomed before me, silent and still, but I could feel it, the presence, watching, waiting. I headed into town, not caring about the hour. I needed answers. I found myself at the diner again, banging on the door until Marla opened it, bleary-eyed and confused.
"What's going on?"
she asked, pulling her robe tight against the chill. "The house," I gasped. "The pines, they're moving. There's something out there. I saw it." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "What is it? What's out there?" She sighed, her expression grim.
"You're not the first. They call it the shadow beneath the pines. No one knows what it really is, but it's been here longer than any of us. Some say it's an ancient spirit, others think it's something far worse. Whatever it is, it wants you. And once it gets close enough, it never lets go."
I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Why me? What does it want?" Marla shook her head.
"Maybe it's not about what it wants. Maybe it's about what you brought with you."
Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My past, my guilt, my wife's death. I'd run here to escape, but the darkness inside me had followed. That night, I didn't go back to the house. I checked into a motel on the edge of town, hoping distance would keep me safe. But it didn't. The whispering followed me, growing louder, more insistent. I tried to ignore it, but sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pines, closer and closer. Later that night, after falling asleep from exhaustion, I woke to the whispers again, louder this time, filling every corner of the room like a choir of the dead. I shot up in bed, my heart racing, and there it was, the figure, standing at the foot of my bed, its shadow stretching across the floor like a black stain. But this time, I didn't feel paralyzed. I felt a horrible, creeping familiarity. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, trembling. It didn't answer, but I felt its gaze bore into me, deep into my soul. Then the whispers changed. They were no longer unintelligible, no longer a distant murmur. They spoke clearly now, and the words sent a chill through my entire body. "You know why." I recoiled, my breath catching in my throat. The memories I had tried so hard to bury were clawing their way back to the surface. I could see her face. Susan. My wife. I had always told myself it was an accident, that it had been a moment of madness, a brief loss of control after months of fighting, screaming, her accusing me of things I didn't want to face. The night she died, we had been arguing again, viciously. She was threatening to leave, and I couldn't let her. Not after everything we had been through. I didn't mean to push her that hard. I didn't mean for her to fall down the stairs. But when she hit the bottom, when I saw her lifeless eyes staring up at me, I knew. And I did nothing. I let her die. And then, I made it look like an accident. The guilt had eaten away at me since, like a rot. But no one suspected me. I had gotten away with it. At least, that's what I thought. But something had followed me. Something new. The figure at the foot of my bed shifted, stepping closer. Its form darkened, swirling, as if it were made of shadows and grief. I could barely breathe. "You," I whispered, my throat tightening. "You're here because of her." It stood silent, but the whispers filled my head, echoing inside my skull, louder and louder, repeating the same phrase over and over. You know why. You know why. I scrambled off the bed, backing into the corner, trembling as I tried to make sense of it all. The pines, the whispers, the shadow, they had never been after me. They were here for justice. Or maybe they were here for something worse. I had run from my guilt, from the darkness I had buried deep inside me, but it had found me. It always would. The figure took another step forward, its face, or what should have been its face, looming closer, and I felt its cold presence wash over me. My breath hitched, and I realized the truth. The forest, the pines, they had been moving closer not because they were chasing me. They had come to claim me. I hadn't escaped my crime. I had been called here, drawn to this place. This was where I would answer for what I'd done. I heard her voice then, not a whisper, but clear and soft, like it had been before everything went wrong. Susan's voice.
You thought you could run from this, Tom? You can't. It's over.
Her words were thick with sorrow. I collapsed to my knees, tears streaming down my face. But the figure's presence suffocated my pain. The room grew darker, the shadows deeper. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, filling every inch of my mind. I couldn't take it. My heart pounded, my chest tight with terror and guilt. And then, in the silence that followed, I understood. This wasn't a haunting. It was judgment. The figure reached for me, its shadowy hand extending, cold as death. And as it touched my skin, I felt everything. The weight of my guilt, the pain I had caused, the life I had stolen. I had thought I could escape, that my secrets could stay buried. But now, the pines had come to bury me instead. I screamed, as the darkness consumed me, dragging me into its depths. The pines weren't moving. I was. And they were taking me home.